in Photoshop. Today we're going to be painting some grapes. And the reason why we're painting grapes is because a lot of students, when they start out, especially painting traditionally and digitally, when you're trying to paint a large grouping such as, grapes, or maybe you have a pile of coffee beans or something like of that nature in your Project 6 fruit crate label, lots of people do struggle with painting things that are in large groups. And, how do we tackle painting this thing where it has a whole bunch of pieces? How do we paint it fast and effectively and not make it look like you kind of just went into cut and paste mode and, robot mode and painted this? So we're going to discuss some quick and easy ways to tackle a grouping of objects similar to grapes. So, and we're also, I also included, this is my photo reference up here. I found an image with grapes with leaves, and we're also going to be discussing painting leaves, since a good chunk of you are probably going to be painting leaves in Project 6, so we'll be talking about those as well. All right, so to get started, I went ahead and just opened a blank document. Again, this is basically how I always set up Photoshop. I have my layers, my history, my color, CMYK over here, and then my toolbar on that side. And I started out with just a simple drawing of these grapes, nothing too detailed, nothing too crazy. I just kind of wanted to mark where I want my leaves are, the basic size of the grapes, etc. And of course I have this photo reference up here. I went ahead and I put in a wash, so, just kind of colored in the background. And I picked out this pink because I enjoy working on complementary colors, so I figured, complement of those green grapes, yellow-green is going to be close to kind of a pink color, pinkish reddish tone. So I put that down because I also really, really hate working on that bright white background. It kind of hurts my eyes. So we got our pink wash. I also went ahead and, similar to how I kind of showed you guys how to paint the spheres, I kind of wanted to start out with just a dark base. And I'm looking to pick this color. This color is kind of it's a mid-tone, warmer green, very dull. I went ahead and added a good amount of red to it. And where I got that color was I was kind of looking in here in between these grapes in the photo and looking at how dark that got. So I wanted, all these grapes that I'm going to have to illustrate to kind of live on top of this nice dark base. Just something for me to start with. So I put that down. I also went ahead and I just, kind of mixed the brown tone and put in the stem up there. So kind of a reddish, brownish, pretty dark in value color, and went ahead and put that there. And then let's go up here to grapes 2. So to start out painting, lots of people, they'll look at this, pile of grapes and get really overwhelmed. And a good way to start a grouping of things is to just go ahead and start painting a couple of those things. So in our case, we have these little grapes. So essentially they are spheres, nothing too complicated about those guys. I went ahead and I painted 2. I will go ahead and paint another 2. And for some people, a lot of what they're going to think is they will just have to paint 1 and then they can copy and paste it over and over again. And if you were to, you could do that, but you're going to end up with something that looks very, very, let me duplicate that. So I'm hitting Option on my keyboard, clicking and dragging that grape. And if you were to go and do that over and over and over and over and over again, you're going to end up with something that looks very stiff and not very interesting. So we'll go ahead and start by just painting a couple of different grapes. And I'm looking at these grapes in the image, and they're all kind of, they have highlights coming in different directions. They all are slightly unique. Some get a little bit cooler, some get a little bit warmer. So we'll just start off by painting a couple different grapes. These are colors that I picked out for these little grapes. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this guy. I'm going to go ahead and hit the lock transparent pixels so I don't paint outside. I'm going to go ahead and return this guy to just a flat green tone. Now I'm using a pretty yellow green, a lot of yellow mixed in there, a lot of blue, the cyan mixed in. I'm dulling it with a little bit of the magenta. So let's start anew. And then I'm going to grab, this was my original, the color I was using for the core shadow. I'm going to go ahead and make this slightly bluer, a little bit more red. And let's go ahead and light this guy. I need kind of a darker grape right now. These are a little bit bright. The shadows aren't too intense. I need a grape that's going to be able to sit kind of farther back, so I kind of want to fill this guy in with a decent amount of shadow and kind of darken him up. I'm using, for anybody curious, I am using the one of the brushes from the Kyle's paint box set. This is the Gouache Go-Go brush that I'm most accustomed to using. It has kind of a chalky texture. Let's go ahead and give this guy a slight highlight. I'm going to grab my original green color right here with the eyedropper. I'm hitting I on the keyboard for the eyedropper. I will go ahead and remove some of that magenta. Let's remove a little bit of the blue, and let's try this. I just want something really subtle. Okay. And then let's go ahead. I don't have a grape with 2 highlights. Like, I'm looking at this guy right here. He's got kind of this double highlight thing going. Same thing with this one. Actually, I need a grape that's really bright and light, you know, similar to the ones I'm seeing over there. So you just want to give yourself a couple options. Let's go over here. You just want to give yourself a couple options, because what you're going to do is you're going to duplicate these a couple times over and over again, and you just don't want all of them to be exactly identical. Let's go ahead and lighten up. I'm going to come in with that green tone. Let's lighten up some of that core shadow in there. And again, I mean, these are super easy. I'm just essentially painting spheres with slightly different highlights and shadows. Let's go ahead and let's get a lot more yellow, a lot less blue, a lot less magenta. I'm going to go ahead and lighten up that yellow a little bit. Let's try this. I want this guy to be really light and really bright. And then let's get really light with our highlight. This was a color I was using for the highlight. We could try that. Let me get a little bit more yellow before I jump into that white. Let's give him another little highlight right there, similar to what we're seeing in the picture. And then let's just go pure white for this really light, bright guy right here. Nice and shiny. There we go. All right, so we got 4 grapes made, and I want to, you know, I've pushed them over to the side so, you know, I can kind of keep them separate from my grouping over here, because I am going to be cutting and pasting them over and over again. So a good idea to start is to start with these grapes kind of tucked in the back, and then we're going to kind of build overlap on top of them. So I'm going to start with my little darker guy right here, and let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and I use the lasso tool. That's this guy up here. You can also hit L on your keyboard, because I want to be able to cut him out and separate him from the group. And notice I'm working on a separate layer. I called this grapes 2. I do have this grape layer, which I'll show you later, but for now we're working on this grapes 2 layer. So did a circle with the lasso tool around him. Now I'm going to hit V on my keyboard. That gives you the black arrow tool right here, and you'll notice these little scissors kind of come up on the side. That just means, you know, now I cut him out. I've cut him separate from the rest of the group. I'm going to go ahead and, because I don't want to, you know, have him disappear back there and not be able to use him later, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this original one, because I will eventually use it again. So I'm going to hit Option on my keyboard, drag this guy over here. I think that that's an okay spot for him. You know, maybe we can make him a little bit smaller. Let's go ahead and bring that guy. Sorry, I'm working without talking about what I'm doing. I hit Command T. That brings up the transform tool option, and that puts this little bounding box around him. So now we can kind of, you know, you can rotate him. I can play with the size, the scale. Let's put him right here. Actually, I'm going to tilt him. And then, you know, each grape is uniquely different. They vary slightly in the group as far as temperature and value especially goes. So with this guy selected, I can go ahead and hit Command U, or of course go up to my favorite tool, Image, Adjustments, Hue Saturation, and you know, maybe this grape he's tucked further back, so maybe he gets slightly cooler. Maybe we bring in a little bit more blue. We can let up on the saturation a little bit. We can even play with the value and go a little bit darker. And that's a good idea to kind of go, as you cut and paste these, go through and just vary up the at least the temperature a little bit. So these things aren't exactly identical. I'm going to go ahead and hit V again on my keyboard to make sure I have my black arrow. With this still selected, I will go ahead and hit Option. And again, I can duplicate that guy. Let's put him over here. Command T to bring out the transform, that bounding box, so I can tilt him a little bit. So now I think these will work as kind of nice background grapes, you know, similar to what I'm seeing in there. They're getting a lot of shadow. I'm going to go ahead and start bringing in some of these guys, these lighter ones. So again, did the lasso, hitting Option to duplicate. Oop, sorry. Let's go, I don't know why my layer got deselected. Option, let's duplicate that guy, bring him down, Command T to transform. I will tilt him a little bit. Let's shrink him down a little bit. Maybe we can put another one right here. Let's tilt him. I'm going to get rid of the, I'll go ahead and turn off the drawing because we can kind of see what we're doing. Let's do a Command U. Let's make him a little bit more yellow and bright. Maybe I'll lighten him up just a tad. Okay. So you can kind of get the idea. I mean, this is starting already with just these 5 sitting here. You know, it's starting to look like a bunch of grapes. You know, we got this guy, he's really light and bright. He's got this really bright white highlight. He sits nicely on top of this cooler grape. I mean, already they look like believably overlapped individual little objects. So, because this is a cooking show, I had already started, you know, putting all these grapes on here just to kind of give you an idea. And what you have to do now is, you know, you'll get through, you'll start to overlap these guys, and you will notice you will have to bring in some darkest darks. So that's kind of what we're going to do next. But before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and turn back on that layer that I was working on. I will go ahead and delete. Let's delete these grapes that I put down really quickly. Delete that guy because I don't really need him. I'm going to go ahead and merge my 2 layers because you kind of get a sense for where we're going with this. I'm going to merge it down. Let's go ahead and I want to use one of my guys with the double highlight. I really like how he looks. Let's go ahead and put him right there. Let's put another one. Let's see. I guess we got to kind of fill up this area. Let's go ahead and do this guy here. And then eventually I'm going to have these leaves I have to paint. So I don't want to do too much more up here. But for now, I think that this is good. And again, you don't want to, this is our base layer that we started with, this color in here. You know, we don't want to worry about, we definitely do not want to cover up all that dark green base layer. We want a little bit of that peeking through because that makes it look like, you know, a pile of grapes with grapes further back in space. Let's do one more grape. Let's do this guy. Oop. There we go. Duplicate. Let me shrink this guy down a little bit. Let's put him there. I'm also going to make him, let's do Command U to mess with the hue saturation and make him a little bit more yellow. Okay. So now we have all these grapes in a cluster. You know, we've duplicated them, copied them, put them on top of one another, and we still need to create this separation between these guys. We need a little bit more contrast. You know, as I look at this photo reference, you'll notice in between the grapes there is this sort of darkest darks, these little, they're almost like cracks, contact shadows. You can especially see it, you know, right here. It gets kind of dark where those two grapes touch each other. So we need to now kind of come in and fine-tune this grouping of these little objects that we have. So I will go ahead and come in with, I'm going to grab, I'm actually going to grab, let's go with, let's just go ahead and grab this original color that I laid on for the base, and let's make it a little bit lighter. I'm going to ease up on some of that black. I'll ease up on some of that magenta. Let's try this. And then I'm going to hit B on the keyboard for my brush. I'm going to go ahead and shrink. I'm shrinking my paintbrush with the brackets that are next to, it's the keys for the brackets that are next to the letter P on the keyboard. And I'm going to just come in and kind of, you know, emphasize some of these details. I'm going to hit R on my keyboard to rotate because that's easier for me. Let's undo this guy. So just these fine, these contact shadows is essentially what they are. They're the, you know, little shadows that appear when you have two objects that kind of, that are just barely touching. This guy, we have kind of a mistake in here, and this is where you're going to have to go through and do some slight edits. You know, we have this grape up here. He's overlapped on top of this guy, yet we have this crazy obnoxious highlight right here. We will have to, let's subdue that highlight a little bit. It's a little bit too bright for something that's overlapped behind an object. And again, we'll come through. I just grabbed the, I hit the eyedropper to grab that contact shadow color. Let's go ahead and whip that around. We can darken that guy in there. And it's just, you know, coming through and refining the details. And I'm always paying attention to where my light's coming from. You know, judging by, I'm kind of trying to copy a little bit of what I see in the photo right here. It looks like the light's kind of coming from the front, slightly to the top, and just kind of mimicking what I see in the photo. So again, by just, you know, illustrating a couple different grapes, you know, I went ahead and illustrated 4 of them, copied and pasted them over and over again. So that way I'm not having to come in and draw these grapes individually. This would have taken hours maybe to illustrate all of these individual little tiny spheres. I'm going to go ahead and, I don't like how this guy is the only super bright one. Let's go ahead and make that guy a little bit brighter, you know, because he is sitting on the very top. He would be picking up a lot of bright highlights. He's got a second little highlight right there. You know, same thing on that guy. We could brighten him up and widen his highlight. And notice, you know, because the highlights are coming from you know, the light is coming from slightly to the top, maybe slightly to the front. Your highlights on this side are going to be really, really white and bright. And then maybe the ones down here are not so bright. They might be picking up a slight highlight, that, you know, this guy is not nearly as light as these guys over here. So you want to vary it up in that way too. Okay. So starting to look like a nice bunch of grapes. I think I'm just about done. You know, I could keep going in. I could add more grapes if I wanted to, but for now, I think this works. And I illustrated a group of things without having to draw, you know, paint them over and over again. So let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and lock my grape layer because I don't want to touch it. I want to move on to these leaves. Now, people tend to, when you're first learning how to paint, you know, whether it's traditional or digital, lots of times people tend to overpaint leaves. Less is more when it comes to painting leaves. And leaves are essentially these flat planes. You know, most leaves are folded in half, as we can kind of see in the image. I already started let's go back to our drawing. So we have these 3 leaves on top. I did already start painting the leaves to kind of give you a sense. Let's go ahead and turn off the drawing for now. So I went with a dark, much cooler green than what you see on the grapes. This is a green with a lot more blue in it, as you can see up here. Let's turn on the drawing. So next I'm going to go and I'm going to paint this leaf. Let me I'm going to get rid of this arrow really quick. Hold on 1 second. He is in the way. There we go. Okay, so we're going to concentrate on this leaf. So these are some colors that I picked out for the leaf. Again, I'm looking at my image. Those are kind of these almost cool, it's a pretty cool green. So I'm going to start with let's start with this color. So just a flat color for this leaf. I'm not worried about rendering or anything at this point. I just want to get that basic shape in there. Zoom in. I'm going to go smaller with my brush. Let's turn off the drawing because this is a little bit hard to see what we've painted with the drawing on it. So there's our kind of basic leaf shape. At this point you could go in and, if you needed to, refine the edges a little bit more. Okay. Now I'm looking at my photo. The light's coming from the top. This leaf is essentially folded in half. That's kind of the nature of most leaves. There's sort of that middle vein going down the center, and the leaf kind of folds in on itself at that center vein. So with the light coming from this direction towards the top front, that means that this plane, this half of the leaf, is going to be in shadow, and this half of the leaf, because it's folded inward, it is facing the light and it's picking up more of the highlight. So there's usually when you look at leaves, you'll see a definite light side, and dark side. So that's kind of what we're going to start with as far as mimicking and painting this leaf. I'm going to go ahead and let's go into our mid-tone color. That's this guy right here. Essentially, it's almost a pure green. I'm using, again, a good amount of cyan, a little bit of magenta to dull it down, 100% yellow, of course, and then a little bit of black to also darken it. And a good place to start is, look at the direction of that center vein. I'll go ahead and start there. I want to make sure, while I'm working on my leaves, that my lock transparent pixel layer is set on so I don't go outside the lines. And that's kind of where that vein is at. And then I'll go ahead and fill in the rest of this grape leaf. So already just with that, it starts to kind of give it a little bit of form and dimension and essentially start to look like a leaf. This leaf is picking up some really strong highlights. These are, it looks like more of a bluish cool highlight, which can be common in waxy leaves. Essentially what's happening is it's reflecting the sky colors. So we can go a little bit, let's lighten up. Let up on the magenta. Let's get rid of a lot of that yellow and get rid of that black. And I'm going to kind of just sweep in an upwards motion and bring in some of those highlights. And it's up to you how you want to stylize your leaf. I'm kind of trying to do a middle of the road approach to these. They're not cartoony, but they're definitely not photorealistic. Let's bring in a little bit of the there's a little bit of a highlight on that side of the leaf as well. Yeah, on the edges. Let's get a little bit lighter. Okay. And now what's really going to bring this to life and really add form is the addition of the veins in the leaf. So when I look at these, you zoom in, essentially they are, most of the times in leaves, you will find the veins are usually lighter than the local color of the leaf. So these are kind of, it looks like almost a yellow. So let's bring in some of these yellow greens. Let's get a lot more yellow. Let's dull it down a tiny bit with that red. And let's try this. Again, I'm going really, really tiny with my brush. Let me see, where does that start? That vein starts right in the center where that little crease is. And in most veins on leaves, or some, I guess I should say, you will find a little bit of a line weight variation. They might go from thick to thin, so that's something else to pay attention to. And pay attention to the direction of your veins. That one, they kind of angle down. I believe that one goes to there. That one goes to there. I'm going to get a little bit lighter on these guys because this is the light side of the leaf, so these veins will be lighter. They're going to be lighter than the other side over there. And then these veins had kind of these branching veins that came out of it, I believe. Now I have to start on the ones on the other side. So you need to get a lot darker, or not a lot darker, a little bit darker. You can especially see it in that leaf. It does pick up a little bit more of the greens. So we could go a tiny bit darker, but according to the picture, there really isn't too much variation in the leaf that we're currently working on. Let's pull that guy around that way. Definitely starting to look like a leaf. Now, to finish it off, I mean, you could get crazy detailed. I mean, there's like an infinite amount of these little veins in here. I mean, if you wanted to keep going, you could. You could come in and bring in some of the darkest darks. I'm going to go ahead and start to end it here, but before I do that, you'll notice on leaves a lot of times there will be some discoloration along the edges. Oftentimes with that light, I mean, you can really see it here. Oftentimes the edges of the leaf will pick up a highlight, or of course, again, it is it's a little bit of a discoloration where the leaf kind of tapers off and it's, the edge of the leaf. So to make it look a little bit more dimensional and less, flat, if you will, it is good to bring in that lighter edge. Let's go a little bit lighter. Get rid of that black. And you would kind of see it. You don't outline the whole leaf, but, just here and there on the edges, it will be picking up a highlight. Especially depending on the thickness of the leaf. If you look at like these grape leaves, like they're very thin, spindly leaves. They're not going to have too much of a sense of thickness or that thick edge, whereas other leaves, like, say something off of, maybe like a succulent or a large tropical leaf, it might have a thicker highlight on the edge. So something else to kind of pay attention to. Let's go, come on, zoom out. Let's go a little bit lighter on some of these edges. And it really just kind of helps them to pop from the background or whatever's behind it. Okay, zoom out. So kind of a nice grouping of leaves. Now we have this leaf grouped, or excuse me, overlapping on top of these grapes. We should make some edits to these grapes. I'm going to quickly just go in and I'm going to push down some of these highlights because this highlight would not be overlapped behind that like that. So I'm going to grab some of this mid-tone color in here, this very bright yellow-green, and I'm going to subdue a little bit of that highlight in there. Let's go ahead and do the same over here for this little guy. Grab this light yellow, just soften that a little bit. There. All right, and the last thing is our little stem. So essentially, this is like kind of like a little branch. Since the light is coming from the top, I want to lighten him up a bit on one edge. So this is a very dark, very warm brown with a lot of red in it. So I'm going to lighten up. I'm going to let up on some of the black, let up on some of the cyan, and let's see what color this gives us. I do have to I have to change my have to go back to my base layer. That's the layer that this branch was on. So I'll go ahead and just work on top of that. Oop, forgot to do my lock transparent pixel. And let's go ahead and lighten this top edge. It's already starting to look like a branch. Let's go even lighter. And I can bring in kind of a brighter highlight. And I don't want my highlight to go too far down because this leaf would be kind of casting a shadow on that branch. Let's see what other details are in here. It kind of has some like white, that almost like that wood grain texture. We could play around with that. Let's go a little bit lighter, a little bit less cyan, a little bit less red. We're just going to lighten that color overall. And, I can come in and start playing with maybe some kind of wood grain. Let's go a little bit darker. I'm going to bring in some of that black in here because I want that texture to continue through to the shadowy area of the little stem, but I don't want these textured marks to be as light as what we're using in the highlighted area. That looks good. I could bring in, we could be silly and, since I'm on a pink background right now, maybe he's picking up a little bit of a reddish, pinkish reflected light along the bottom of this branch. We could try that. Let's go a little bit cooler. And do that so it's not so hard. I could even, if right now these grapes, the way that they're lit, especially referring back to the photo reference, they look like they're sitting on just like a white surface taken in a studio. But, if I wanted to have these guys sitting on, say, a pink background like this, this would be a good time to now bring in reflected lights to these grapes. If I wanted to, I could end it here. But, just as an example, let's go in. I'm going to re-grab that shadow color. I'll go ahead and get rid of some of that cyan. I'll push the magenta a little bit more because we're kind of going to bring in some purple tones. And let's try that. And you could, again, if you wanted to, if you needed a reflected light at this time, you could bring that in. Let's go even lighter. This is way, way too dark. Especially if you had like a fruit, if these grapes were sitting next to, say, like an orange or, some other fruit was right next to them, that those fruits would be reflecting onto the grapes, if you will. So again, this looks a little bit odd because we don't have anything next to these grapes that are this color. I forgot to turn on that. So these reflected lights might look a little bit odd, but you can kind of get a sense of what I'm trying to do. And, if you wanted to do this at this point, this would be the time to do it. And it makes them look a little bit less monochromatic. And you would see those reflected lights just kind of in this grouping of grapes right here. Kind of interesting. Anyway, that's it, guys. So again, why we did this, I kind of wanted to show you guys, one, how to paint foliage, how to paint leaves, because lots of people tend to trip up on them and they overdo it. And second, this is kind of an easy, fast, effective way to paint groupings of things. I started out, just to reiterate, I started out with that, well, I started out with my drawing, of course, but I started out with just that base color, brought in that dark, I'm looking at the dark colors in between the grapes. I decided to use that for my base. I put in a dark brown for that branch, or that stem rather, and then I went ahead and I painted just a couple of the grapes. I went ahead and I started with 4, and then I kind of piled them on top of each other, copy and pasted them, if you will. And I started with the grapes further back that are more in shadow, and then of course overlap them one on top of the other, and then I went in and I made my tight little edits with these darker contact shadows. Maybe I had to move around some of the highlights. Maybe I had to brighten up some of the highlights. One thing I did forget is grapes do have these little freckles, these little dots on the bottom of them. That would be, as you're making these, little edits here and there, this would be the time to come in and bring those guys in. All those little fun details, little, contact shadows, the little freckles, etc. And then I went in and I did my leaves on a second layer, and then, of course, painted that branch. So that's it. So a quick, easy, effective way to paint something with a lot of objects in it. Again, you could do this with, if you had a big pile of coffee beans in your project sticks, or, maybe you even have like a large bush with a bunch of leaves on it, and you could kind of do something similar to what we did here. Anyways, that's it, guys. I hope it was helpful, and talk soon.